Welcome back to Beyond Classified. I'm Chris Matthew. Today, my guest is Adam Weinstein. He has a business degree from Drexel University and is a self-taught programmer. He has always been a naturally curious person and enjoys exploring the why behind things. Ultimately, that curiosity led him towards researching the current state of news and political polarization we see in the media. Things came to a head when COVID hit and he became fed up with the modern news experience. He decided to start Syft News with a friend to create an alternative experience that gives control back to the people. More broadly, he hopes to shed more light on this type of technology so people can make conscious choices and set boundaries around it. Adam, welcome. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Chris. How are you?
I'm excellent, man. It's good to have you. I love what you're doing with Syft News. Man, it's a double-edged sword technology, and it can be used for good of humanity or for evil. Unfortunately, the majority of tech being used on a global scale, especially tech associated with social media and online information, not so much for our benefit at this moment. It's a tool, so you can use it either way. We can use it to turn around the information for ourselves, but there's so much misinformation right now. It gets hard to sift through the stuff, and exactly. I love the title, Syft News. Now, we're at a critical point in our evolution that something like this can be extremely beneficial to us. So I'm looking forward to hearing about what you got going on. Let's start with a little bit more about yourself, your background, and what got you started rolling with this.
Yeah, so my background's I've done a variety of jobs. I've done mostly business has been my focus in terms of like educational background, but I've always been a programmer at heart, an engineer at heart, and so I've kind of developed a hybrid skill set in that way. I've worked for big companies like Boeing, and I've worked for a startup most recently that was in the machine learning space. So for them, it was more about building out a recruiting model to help match candidates with clients and try to automate that portion of the process, which is really when I started to kind of dive into this space of machine learning and the role that it has been kind of taking over and shaping society in that way. And I kind of just took that alongside just the news space in general, because I'm always someone who just kind of wants to understand why and look into things a little bit deeper. And obviously, when seeing just the current state of politics and how social media has taken over and these tools that we've been using to get the news and follow through with these information channels, I just wanted to kind of better understand those relationships. And I started kind of digging deeper, peeling back the onion a bit, trying to understand how all of this works. And in particular, what's even perpetuating political polarization, specifically in the US. And that's really when I stumbled on the opportunity to create Syft News as really an alternative to what I was seeing out in the market in general.
Awesome, man. When did you start seeing the real dangers of misinformation in media and social media? Was it after COVID, or were you looking into it a little bit before?
Well, even before, I mean, to be honest, even back when I was in college, I was seeing like where a lot of times I would try to have productive conversations, but a lot of times it would seem like people were just talking at you, not with you, and there was no real productive outcome from the conversations. And I think even at that point, I started to notice that these tools favor you sort of sticking to like-minded individuals, because that's what they were built for initially, right? They weren't necessarily built for sort of open-minded discourse between different groups of people. I mean, to some degree, yes, that was allowed, but it seems like the way that people used it and gravitated towards it, it was more about building those communities. And it seemed like people gravitated more towards sticking to their own beliefs. It didn't really foster, exploring things outside of what you may like. And a lot of that it comes back to the technology that in terms of how it's being built, right? And that relates to the machine learning algorithms and part of what's facilitating a lot of the fake news that we see floating around on the platform still today.
Yeah, for sure. Did you think that things would escalate to the point that we're at now, as far as the saturation of false narratives and information going wild, just since 2020, since COVID?
Yeah, so I mean, I wanted to believe for a while that things would reconcile, they would get better. I didn't want to believe that things would just continue to get worse, but that's exactly what has happened. I mean, I feel like we've continually just drifted further and further apart. Even just looking at the politics of it left and right. I mean, I've read stories about how people just won't date Republicans or vice versa, or they won't talk to them, or like they'll just block people on social media if they disagree with you. And it just kind of, it's hit a point where it's just, it's honestly just insanity from what I've seen in terms of how far we've drifted apart. And there's nothing I've seen to really help shift that, right? There's no, I mean, well, I'll get into part of what I was going to say later on, but like, there's nothing I've seen that's really helped correct course. And that's kind of part of what the goal of Syft News would be as well, to try to help identify a solution to correct course, right? Because I haven't seen anything help bring us back to a normal sort of baseline.
Well, I mean, and one of the huge problems is we're only seeing one side of the information. We're only seeing one side of the narrative. We have a whole portion of our society that's being silenced, and it's frustrating because we can't tell how many the majority are, how people really feel about what's going on, because everything is censored for one side. Now, speaking of the censorship, I remember when it first really hit hard after they got rid of Alex Jones, and it was a trickle down effect to all the smaller outlets and independent media and on YouTube, and it just kind of went crazy from there. What did you think when this was happening? Did you think this would reconcile itself, or did you see it getting to where it is right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, for me, this whole thing has just been a snowball effect, right? It's just everything, it just kind of adds on to the next, and it's all kind of moving in that same direction where, I mean, to be completely honest, and I'm sure you've dealt with similar issues, but even on the advertising side, where I was using Facebook to try to obviously get traction for Syft News initially, and when I was running tests to see if we could get any traction, the ad models that Facebook, like the filters that you're able to use, are not allowed anymore. They were completely blocked, so I can't even advertise to certain groups of people anymore on the platform. Just because they don't want you to do that. And this is just the trend of modern technology. And I guess, I get the argument of they're private companies, but I mean, my stance has always been at a certain point, some of these companies, they sort of transcend the private technology space, and it goes into the public domain where, these tools are so ingrained in society that they should be held to a particular standard that just supports society as a whole, right? Where they're not using that power to a certain degree that can then shape society in a negative way. Right? They have to just be held to a higher standard, in my opinion. But to your point, I mean, this whole thing has just been a snowball effect in every regard from what I've seen.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I don't think we're even close to seeing the end of everything that's happening. Let's get to what this Syft News is and behind it, and maybe a little bit of the technology behind it. First, for those that may not know about it, talk about machine learning algorithms and how these can work, for our benefit.
Sure. Yeah. So at a high level, when you think machine learning algorithms, it's this process where you take a set of data, right? And it's essentially your training data. And the goal is to uncover certain patterns within that data to then help you classify information or make predictions, and to just ultimately do some sort of process better and automate it through this concept of machine learning, which essentially means allowing a computer to learn from that set of data. So just to give a simple example, if you look into the finance or investing space, one application here is you can analyze stock data and market history to then isolate certain signals in the market to then tell you when you should buy or sell or make certain moves in real time within the market. This is also seen with the recommendation algorithm. So if you're looking at Spotify, your top 100, your weekly list or whatever it is, that all comes from recommendation algorithms where they're looking at the data you're providing. So what are you listening to? How long are you listening to it for? What are other people listening to that are similar to that? And how does that compare to the rest of their library of content? And can they recommend that to you so that you engage with it? So just a different example, but they all pretty much work the same way. Now, those are two examples that I would say are generally, harmless and overall benefit society in a way. So I just want to point out here too that the technology itself is not inherently bad, right? It's just there's certain use cases where I feel like things go a little too far, and where I think people should be more aware of and make some more just conscious decisions around how it impacts their life. And so for me, that's like with news, that would be crossing a line for me in terms of what you should or should not be comfortable in terms of using this type of technology in that domain. So just to kind of add on to that, the main difference here is because if you don't want to listen to Spotify or Netflix or whatever, you don't have to do that. But in society, news is such a core part of your channel to the outside world and understanding what is going on, that unless you just want to shut out the outside world, you can't just stop reading or watching the news, right? It's an ingrained part of just any society. So now I don't want to go too far off track with this, but that's sort of the general gist of like machine learning and applications and how it's sort of taking shape within our society, because the technology itself is never going to go away. It's only going to get better and more advanced, because this is ultimately what is driving a ton of profit for these companies. Mm-hmm. So it's not going to slow down in terms of its development.
Well, let's talk about how machine learning basically crosses a line with news and media, mainstream media platforms. It takes, you have in your notes, it takes accurate news about 6 times as long as false news to reach you on things like Twitter.
Exactly, yeah.
Wow.
So that was actually coming from an MIT study. If you've seen The Social Dilemma, they actually mentioned the same study. And it's fascinating because with what they discovered was that it's not even necessarily the bots or the algorithms that are doing it. It's people retweeting information, and that's what's spreading it so quickly. And so even with the social media sites, keep in mind too that there was a Pew Research study that was done not too long ago that looked at how people get news, and more than 50% of the country from this study is actually using social media as their primary news source, where they get news from it regularly. So this is something that a lot of people are relying on for information, and yet between the algorithms themselves trapping them in filter bubbles, which is essentially this is part of crossing the line, where this content essentially will only recommend content to you that is agreeable to you, that you've proven to, like Facebook, Twitter, Google, etc., that you engage with. And so you're dealing with that, but then you're also dealing with the retweeting and people sharing information that can be false that is popping up on your news feed. So there's a lot going on within that space that I would just call noise in terms of how do people decipher this information or disseminate it in a way that they can get an actual clear picture of what is going on in the world. Because when you realize that you could be looking at something that could be false information, or you're looking at something that is really only sort of fortifying your own beliefs, it's very difficult to kind of break out of that shell because of the way these products are designed.
Yeah, man. And I would encourage everyone to try this experiment. Find someone that you have a completely opposite belief system from, whether it's Republican or Democrat or Christian, whatever these major polarizing topics. Find someone that is completely different, has a completely different belief system than you, and scroll down their news feed compared to yours. It's like a completely different reality. It's like they don't even live on the same planet you're living on. It's crazy to see how divided people have become just based on social media and the timelines that they're scrolling through, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you did that with Google too. You can Google literally the exact same thing, but you will see different results based on where you are, your search history, your preferences. This stuff, it's everywhere. I mean, it really is, because even the entire ad network and ad retargeting it's built the exact same way. Oh, like because you click on one thing on Amazon, and then you go on Instagram, you get an ad for it. You just clicked on it, right? It's how a lot of these systems and products that we use are built. It's just wild how sort of ingrained all of this is within society. And then this is also, again, impacting people's information channels. And a lot of that affects people's mental health. It affects how people perceive the world. It affects how people interact with others. And I think that this is also what's part of what is fueling political polarization in the country, because it's like, well, look at the products that we're all using every single day, right? It's aiding in that.
Yeah, for sure. Now, not to get too like woo-woo or off topic or anything, how do you feel about AI and its dangerous potential? You know, you hear things like the singularity, and it's gonna, decide that humans aren't worth having around one day. I want to get your thoughts on that as a programmer.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. I mean, I think I read the other day that there was like some breakthrough in like sentient awareness for a computer, and I don't know. I don't know if true AI really exists in terms of understanding, like a robot's understanding emotion and making decisions. I still think humans are the best decision makers and problem solvers that have existed to this point. And obviously, humans as a whole are flawed. So I don't know if like building an AI and sort of the vision of a human is necessarily the right way to go. But I don't know. I feel like as long as it's, again, I feel like a lot of it's just setting boundaries, right? Even going back to this technology, it's like, what are we comfortable with? I don't think it's the right idea to try to build a superior race through this. But if we can find ways to just automate things, make things easier, that is probably the way to go. But I think a lot of it just comes down to problem solving and application, and clearly define goals with what AI can do for society. I guess that's where I'm coming from. I don't know if.
Go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say, like, I guess I can.
Go ahead. Finish.
Oh, yeah. I mean, my last thought was just like, I don't see us either being like the singularity. I don't know if I buy totally into that. I think I forget the Kurzweil. Is that? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, he's an interesting guy for sure. I don't know if I subscribe to all of his beliefs, but my stance is just kind of going around setting boundaries around, what can this do for us in terms of aiding and improving society.
Right on.
I would just keep it within that arena.
Right. Well, what about the aspect that machines will be taking people's jobs, and this is accelerating at a very high rate every day. We see more and more things that these machines and robots can do that will just easily replace the worker with automation. Do you see any dangers in this, in the immediate future?
Well, that's for sure. Even just the whole trucker industry. I don't know if you've heard about that, but automated truckers, and that would level an entire industry. And I know that the common thought there is to just retrain them, but it's really not that simple. So there are absolutely threats to this. There's some interesting legislation where they say, these companies that are pushing this automation, they make so much money, they should have a tax, or like, going into even UBI with this automation. I think UBI is something that I would want to be tested more and entertained more, because I think that is something that, where again, kind of going back to what can this do to benefit society? I think in the grand scheme of things, if we're talking utopia, idealistic reality, if we all had more time in our lives to do what we wanted to, and so that we're not all sort of slaving away doing like the 9-to-5 type of job, I think most people would be in favor of that. But obviously there's not a leap from point A to point B. There will have to be a curve there, which would mean people would have to lose jobs in between. So I think being able to manage it, there are absolutely threats to this technology. And that's why I think it's important to kind of have or keep in mind any repercussions in terms of like, this is going to be a change, but how do we make it gradual? And so we don't just level an entire industry to put robots in place. So there's always got to be a balance. But there are definitely some risks to this in the immediate term.
Right. And while we're still kind of looking at the illusions that the media portrays, I guess a couple of years ago, there's a lot of researchers that believe that the U.S. is controlled, the media is controlled by 6 companies. I think it's a lot less than that now. I think it's down to a couple of companies that control everything. I could be wrong, but there is a definite illusion of choice that they're presenting us. They're trying to separate all these different products into something that is from a same corporation, probably made with the same poisonous ingredients that will have the same outcome on humanity. And they have a monopoly on everything. And it's for people that, like yourself, who are creating something on an individual basis, it's hard to kind of get yourself out there when everything is focused on the mainstream corporate bullshit, right?
Well, yeah. So kind of moving into more of the like how the media business itself is structured. It's interesting because the companies that exist today, they keep sort of gobbling each other up and buying each other up, and they own hundreds of billions of dollars under assets, in assets. And it wasn't always that way. I mean, if you go back into the 70s, you had 50 plus companies that own pieces of this space. And now, like you take Disney, for example, they're absolutely massive in terms of their power, in terms of in the media. And then even if you look at lower levels, it's the same exact thing. So a few years ago, there was a video passed around with a bunch of Fox News anchors reciting this identical script, and then it went from like one to the next, and it like zoomed out and then showed like hundreds of these local Fox News stations reciting the exact same script. Have you seen that?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay. So that's a product of the Sinclair Broadcast Group. So this is another conglomerate within the broadcast space, and they own something like 300 channels. They have access, or they reach around 40% of U.S. households, and they're known for restricting the amount of politics they cover. They send like canned piece scripts, like the one on the video, to these networks, and they're notorious for this. And it's like it just blows my mind how much power exists in such concentrated levels. And then you might think even on the publication space, maybe it's a little bit better. And you look at, like, you take the Chicago Tribune, for example. They were one of the oldest newspapers in the country. They're still one of the largest publications in circulation today. And so they're owned by this larger publishing company called the Tribune, right? And they had some rough years. Obviously, local news, it's hard to make money in that space right now. But they eventually found a way to become stable in the last year or so. And almost exactly a year ago today, actually, May 2021, this company called Alden Global Capital came in and made an offer to buy the Tribune for $633 million. And they sold. Now, Alden is a hedge fund. And going back to like 2007, they started buying up these newspapers. Because at the time, the Great Recession, things weren't going well for the newspapers at that point either. They thought maybe, well, this company can come around, buy them up, maybe some good will happen. They'll turn their business around. Fast forward to today, and they are the second largest newspaper publishing company in the U.S. They control about 200 newspapers, and their model right now is pretty simple, where they buy these newspapers up. They gut the staff, they jack up subscription prices, and they just milk it for all it's worth in terms of the cash value of it. And they've just been systematically going through buying newspapers and just absolutely gutting them. And the largest newspaper publisher right now, believe it or not. So again, through all these other acquisitions and movement, it's a company called Gannett, but they are owned by a private equity firm who is owned by SoftBank. So it kind of just everything trees up into these massive conglomerates, and SoftBank is a Japanese-owned conglomerate. So you're talking the two largest publishing companies within the U.S. are a Japanese conglomerate and a hedge fund. So it's like at every level, it's just these massive companies dominating the media space, and everything trees up to them. It's still crazy to me how much concentrated power exists within this space.
Yeah, it is. It is. And it's crazy how these companies don't care about the end result. Sometimes lately they don't even care about profits being made. They just care about putting forward a certain agenda. It seems like this whole system is crumbling because they're not, these companies and even the media and Hollywood is not providing a product that is it's a subpar product. It's not something that people are wanting anymore because it's entertainment is not entertaining anymore. They're not hiring people who are qualified for jobs anymore. They're not trying to provide products that will actually do what the product is said to do. It's all about agendas, trying to put forward different ideas into the public, trying to steer the society in certain directions through the messages in media, in social media, and it is no longer about the end product or even profits. So that's where I think the system's going to crumble, and a new kind of up-and-coming people like yourself are going to come in because people want real stuff. They want real news. They want real information, and they're tired of the bullshit propaganda in everything, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, because even looking at the structure, it's like if they have that much control, like that's what defines the mainstream media. They would never report on something that's not mainstream because it doesn't support their interests, right? That's sort of the whole point. And really, it presents a conflict of interest because what I would have liked to see for a long time is some sort of antitrust legislation around this space because it very much has become a monopoly. And there's absolutely nothing. There's absolutely nothing that I've heard to try to, we need like a modern day Teddy Roosevelt to come in, but I don't see any candidates that can really embody that either. So.
Yeah. There's no one going to be coming along to save us. That's going to be our job. And people like yourself are taking the reins on this stuff, man. I love it. Tell us all about Syft News and what you got going and the whole idea and concept behind it and where you're at with it.
Yeah. So Syft News, the whole idea is to, I guess, starting on the product side, is to flip the model of the normal passive news experience that we have. So again, a lot of, it's more so built to be like an alternative to, say, like social media, if you use that, where a lot of times it's scrolling, it's just passive information, channels passively getting information and whatever's shared within your network. Whereas with Syft, instead of analyzing people and content recommendations, we're trying to actually analyze the content itself. So, can we understand if there's a certain sentiment where so someone's trying to inflict some sort of emotional language or an opinion even within the content, can we identify that? Eventually we'll look into validity. We're looking at the political bias of the news source, trying to just give you as much information up front about what it is that you're actually reading, and then also giving you the ability to customize your newsfeed however you want. So for example, if you want to look at left or right or somewhere in the middle news sources all on one feed, you can do that. If you want to have a feed of just far left and see how they view something, or far right, you can kind of very easily move through the full spectrum of the information. Because again, the core focus here is to create almost like an open repository where you can actively ask questions and do your own digging within this, the context of the news that's available. So it's not like you have to just read what's on the feed in front of you. If you want to look at a specific issue, you can search for that issue and then select filters around the news source, and you can see the bias and see those breakdowns. And really try to usher in more of this active news experience where people actually have more control over what they see. So, and in terms of where we're at right now, so right now we have, it's live right now on syftnews.com. It's still early on in the sense that there's still plenty of updates that we're trying to work on. And over time, I'll start, delving more into the resources to improve the data science, improve our ability to identify these things. It's never going to be done, to be fair. It's within the space of specialty models, you're never done. So it's always an evolution. But that's sort of the core sort of platform side. And then the other side, more in terms of the content itself, as we talked about, there's this illusion of choice within media. Part of what I want to be able to do is instill more independent news sources, try to reinvigorate the concept of even independent local journalism, ideally even nonpartisan journalism, if we can identify it. Because we're seeing in this space, I don't know if you heard of a company called Substack, but they're one of many companies that allow people to build and host their own newsletters. And so you're seeing people being able to support themselves outside of sort of the large typical newsrooms or publications, and build out their own following. And the benefit with that is, they can host their content, but they don't necessarily do much in helping them market that content. But there is this rise in people that are trying to get better journalism, better content out there. So the goal would be to have them, get their content onto Syft News as well. So we can kind of create this almost like a two-sided marketplace where you have people that can, you can still aggregate the national sources if you want. There's nothing wrong with that. But you'd still have the other options available to you where you can look at national sources versus local or independent sources, and even better understand what the differences are between them, and just ultimately have more options. I don't think more information is bad in this space, because again, you would have the ability to read what you want, come to your own conclusions, and ultimately just kind of just change how people think about reading and interacting with the news. So I guess that's I guess in a nutshell what the sort of vision of the product is.
Right on, man. How do you get started with something of such a huge product like this, especially on the programming? And I'm no way a programmer or techie guy at all, so I would be completely lost. What's the kind of process for getting something like this off the ground?
Yeah, so there's actually a lot of tools that allow you to build websites no code nowadays. It's been I kind of got my roots in Excel, and then I started to teach myself SQL and Python after that. And for me, it was easy enough to kind of get the basic website together. I was able to build out a news aggregator, which is really where it all starts in terms of just getting the content. And then from there, it was just a matter of piecing together information that I had available. So there's like sentiment analyzers and things that pretty much work well enough out of the box. So that's how I was able to sort of bootstrap my way into the MVP that we have now. Moving forward in the future, data science is going to be a core focus, obviously, to always improve the models that we have, because ultimately, the better that we can classify the content, the better the product's going to be to the end user. And outside of that, building out the marketplace is certainly a whole nother level of complexity. Full transparency, we're not there yet, but that is the sort of the vision or the goal that we want to get to really kind of keep things moving and to try to turn the tides in that way. Because again, it's like for me, the larger problem is trying to just sort of in my own way, I guess. Try to break up some of the monopolies that we have, or at least break up some of the reliance we have on the monopolies. Because again, like I said, there's no legislation coming. So the only thing we can really do is to try to make it profitable again for independent local journalists to step up and be able to have that platform. Because local journalism used to be like the lifeblood of this country. It used to be what it ran on, because these people have an inherent interest in improving their community. A lot of these national news sources, a lot of these massive conglomerates really don't care, and it's not their prerogative, which is fine. But that doesn't mean that we should continue to squeeze out the local and independent journalists. So anyway,
yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was done.
Okay. Well, along the same lines. there's this new kind of theme of perceived dangerous information coming from certain aspects of the media. And me personally, I don't think any information is dangerous. It's all about how you perceive the information. And I think that humans have a lot more capability to discern information than we're being told. We're being told we have to be told exactly what we want to hear and see and think. But there is this notion that, some opinions are dangerous and hurt people and whatever, hurt people's feelings. But there is also a level of intentional misinformation that probably could cause harm in certain aspects. So there's another kind of fine line you gotta watch out for if you're allowing open source information from everywhere, right? What do you think the answer to this is, if any? I'm not about censorship at all. I think, like I said, I don't believe there is dangerous information. It's all about how you discern it. But what do you think?
I agree. I've always been someone that I would rather have information and I can read it and come to my own conclusions. And the only truly like bad information maybe is if it's like intentionally sinister. But I mean that's something where it's like if that's the case, I don't.
That's what the mainstream's doing actually. But
Well, yeah. It's. But again, that's part of the agenda pushing and the fact that that's more valuable to them, and because I know it sells. I mean, if I'm being completely honest, I'm like, if you look at things at a high level and the way that media is structured, I mean, do you think that it's more profitable for them to create an absolute chaotic narrative or one that's actually logical, well-reasoned, and sound? Like they make more profit in chaos than in calmness. And that's why their profit incentive is to continue to push these narratives because they're divisive inherently, and because people talk about them more, and because it pushes more content. It probably ups their subscriber volume because they're like hitting on very passionate issues, and they understand that because that's their audience. Like they are inherently a business. This is what for-profit journalism looks like. I mean, this is like the pinnacle of for-profit journalism. And so, it's wild. But kind of going back to in terms of, is there bad information? Ultimately though, I'd rather have more than less, and let either the people decide or at least classify it in a way so that if it is questionable, not like flagging it and what social media does right now, but just make that information, or if there's any concern around the validity of the information, just make that clear to the person reading it. But like, it's not our intention to tell you how to use it or why to use it. It's just meant to be a tool, right? That's, to really also help people keep up with the speed of information, because even today, you look at how much content in general is produced. It's impossible to read even a small fraction of it. So this is, it's something to help people keep up with information and have more control over it. So in that sense, it's like, if you don't want to read something, you don't have to read it. It's not like it's there, and you have to read it. It's just to encourage freedom, exploration. And so I don't think within that context that there really is anything sinister within that.
Right on. Now, I want to get your thoughts on some techie stuff that I don't really understand. Starting with crypto and blockchain, I want to know if you think it's beneficial, if there's any downsides we should be worried about, and if you're integrating anything like that into your systems.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I've always been, in terms of crypto, I've always believed that it's the companies that utilize blockchain as a technology within like a business application, that was always going to be what kind of drove value within them. Bitcoin as a store of value, I get. It's just, I think it's just ultimately too volatile to be that, in my opinion. But companies that I've looked into, at least, that look like they have sort of a business application, either within storing information within the blockchain, or any sort of like supply chain operations that utilize that. To me, that's where I felt like that was the most value, at least in terms of safety. If I'm looking to invest, right? That's what I was looking at specifically.
Right on. Now, are you going to be possibly integrating anything having to do with crypto or blockchain into what you're doing with Syft News? I know there's a bunch of companies, including one I work with, Rokfin, who do work with their own token. They mint their own token and things of that nature. Is that something that you're ever interested in?
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, if we could potentially even tie that into like some sort of fact checking or like validating of the content itself, could be interesting. It's not something that we've talked about or anything, just because it's, we're still kind of focusing on just the groundwork, I guess, laying the groundwork for the foundation of it. But I won't say it's like out of the question.
What about NFTs? This is one that I really, I've been wanting to get in, have a better understanding of what this is. First, maybe if you could tell us what your understanding is and if you're implementing anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, to be completely honest, NFTs are not something I've gotten into either. It's like one of those things where like I've wanted to look into it, but I just haven't really sunk my teeth into it yet either. It just from what I've read, it sounds like it's. It sounds like it's an inherent bubble where like they have value because they say it has value, but there's no inherent value to an NFT. It's like almost like a piece of art. Like I've seen a lot of artists create NFTs that they can sell. I personally don't think we'll like jump into that at all. But yeah, I really haven't looked into that too much, to be honest.
Are you concerned that censorship and overall agendas that are unfolding right now are going to be a catalyst to basically the downfall of any types of online freedom of speech or communication that we're seeing, to where it's all going to be centralized under this one, global wing, to where they control all information coming in, all information going out, and we're only going to hear the one narrative. That's what they obviously want for our future, but do you think it can be achieved, or do you see a more brighter outcome and us breaking out of these systems?
Yeah, of course, I believe that there is a way out of it. I don't think that we're sort of predetermined or destined to go anywhere in particular. I think if there's anything what we've seen is we're really good problem solvers as people, right? And I think that as people begin to understand the problem and can understand how to either work around the problem or find alternative, like the key is alternatives. A lot of like what you described, sort of the dystopian element of it, is because there's no choice, right? Like if we're forced into that route, then that's what will happen. But the reality is that we're not forced into doing that. It's just the way that the system is structured. So for me, it's like, as long as there are people that are willing to understand where the gaps are, and even without like what I'm trying to do with Syft News is to build out those alternatives and try to find even business models that support those alternatives. I think we'll be okay, right? Because even like just to Rumble, for example, I've heard of, that's a company that's an alternative to YouTube that is more about just pro consumer, pro user and content creator in terms of what you're able to share. So like companies like that, right? Just focusing on alternatives, focusing on really also just the positives of what we're able to do, and really fostering the communities that see the world in that way, in the bright way, right? What we can do and what we can achieve within the system itself. Because again, we're not forced into a certain line of thinking, regardless of what the powers that be want us to believe, of course, right? It's mainstream for a reason, but you don't have to abide by it.
Right. Well, are you worried about them, possibly flipping some kind of online switch to where you're not even allowed on there? You can't, we're not allowed on the airwaves anymore. We're not allowed online, on social media. We're not allowed to create our own platforms. It all has to be part of these two corporations, and if it's not part of that, you're under it. Do you think that is a possibility?
I mean, I want to say no in this country. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know it's like if we're looking at like a country like Russia, then it's absolutely true. But I want to believe in the U.S. that's not something that would happen, or at least if it does happen, that's when people would start making some changes. Like I don't want to believe we're going to live under some overlord dictator where we have no ability to, make decisions, or because that's not at all what the country's about. I mean, that's I can't say it's impossible, but I'd want to believe that if that were ever something that were even propositioned, like that someone somewhere would step up to not let that legislation pass through. I mean.
Right on, and that's if it does, that's when we find out where the cojones are, right? Oh,
yeah,
man.
I mean that would be the true ultimatum for the direction of this country.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we're definitely living in critical times when it comes to all this stuff. Where do you see the future of Syft News, and how far do you see this going?
Yeah, so in terms of the future, like right now, the goal is to really just start to get the word out, start talking about the vision. I want to also just emphasize the fact that this is something that's like very much going to be a grassroots movement, and we're still early enough to where people that I talk to day to day, friends, colleagues, anyone else that I've talked to about this, are able to help us shape the direction of the company as well, in terms of the features they want to see, the experience they want to see. Because ultimately we're trying to create a better news experience, and to do that, we're doing that for the people, right? We're trying to be a very pro-consumer product. I don't even run ads on the site. I don't intend to run ads on the site, because again, that's a big part of what clutters people's space when they're trying to read content. And so, at this point, it's just a matter of trying to get some momentum going, getting people on board with the vision, sign up for the product, try it out, see what you think, what you like, what you don't like, and then just continue to build around the people that care and want to see this continue to be a part of their life. Because I know for me, I've been using it myself, and it's been really cool to be able to look at different perspectives and see what I could be missing out on from, if I was just scrolling on like Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. And so I want to just see other people sort of have that experience too, and then continue to build around that, build out the amount of sources we have, build out the features that we have. So in terms of how far I see this going, I mean, I want to believe that this can become a legitimate competitor within the, maybe not so much like competing specifically with social media, but as a news aggregator, something that people go to and use day to day as part of a habit. I think if we can get to that level where people kind of prefer to use Syft News over social media, that would be like the pinnacle of success in my mind, where people are actually kind of taking ownership over their information channels. So that would be like my end goal of where I can get to. And I do believe we can get there. I mean, it's certainly not going to be an easy path. This is very much against David versus Goliath sort of mission, because these companies are so massive. But for us, it's like we're trying to at least play nicely with them. We're not trying to say that they're inherently evil or bad necessarily. It's just that their control is what's concerning, right? Yeah. And that's ultimately what we're trying to build an alternative to. And then, of course, if we can also help revive, even in some small way, the local or independent journalism market, because it's just completely like gutted at this point. I mean, like I said, at every level, these local journalists and these newsrooms are getting gutted, and it's been that way for a long time. And again, that used to be the lifeblood of America in terms of people caring about their community, educating their community, because this is maybe getting a little off topic, but even just talking about journalism as just a concept, that used to be an esteemed title, right? Like that should be like in line with,
for sure,
a community social, not social worker, but you know what I mean, where it's like they're a key part of maintaining society. Yeah. And right now it's like you're more closer to like an actor or an actress,
a propagandist.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so even to like help restore some of what journalism used to be, I think that would be the sort of the pinnacle of where I'd want this to be, where if we're able to do both sides of that, that would be phenomenal.
Right on, man. I am on board. Tell the people how they can find out more if they want to check out what you got going so far.
Yeah, for sure. So like I said, you can check it out at syftnews.com, syftnews.com. We got Instagram, Syft News, as well as Facebook, all the socials. It's all Syft News. So pretty easy to find there. But I'd say best way would be to create an account and just check it out. I'm pretty easy to talk to, and I don't know if I can send you my socials as well, but it's Adam Weinstein. I mean, there's a lot of them, so I can send you the specific.
Yeah, I'll put them in the description if you want. Sure.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I'm easy enough to talk to. Reach out. I'm curious to hear what people think, and so yeah, that's the best way to support, and I appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk to you as well.
For sure, man. Yeah, I love what you're doing, and keep it up. I'm hoping that it will actually destroy the traditional social media and BS news platforms forever. But, that's just high hopes. But, man, yeah, I do love what you're doing. Thank you so much for coming on and talking with us today. And I'd love to talk with you again in the future. And don't hang up after we go. I just wanted to talk with you for a second about something else. Well, until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening, and we will talk again tomorrow. We'll see you then.